found among the southeast countries of the continent of Asia, neighboring the countries of Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. The country consists of an estimate of 16 million people with a growth rate of 1.46%.
Cambodia's early history can be traced all the way back to the 5th millennium BCE, with early influences from India during its Funan period, which happened around the first 6 centuries. This was followed by Chenla period in the next 3 centuries, and this led to the construction of the famous Angkor Wat, which is now the most visited tourist spots in Cambodia. The Angkorian Empire was known as the most powerful empire in Southeast Asia, but later declined, and this resulted in many conflicts within the country. Because of this, Cambodia was made vulnerable to their neighboring countries, Thailand and Vietnam. This was their opportunity to take over and invade the country, but they were unable to because of the French, who at that time funded the economy of Cambodia. The country obtained its independence in 1953, but no longer after did they face a major tragedy in the 1970s when they were invaded by the US and the South Vietnamese military. It was then when Cambodia was caught in a battle against the Communist Party of Kampuchea. This was one of Cambodia's darkest times. Under the regime of Pol Pot, a political leader who led Cambodia from 1975 to 1979, millions of Cambodians died due to starvation, execution, disease, and overwork. The Khmer Rouge government at that time attempted to create a classless communist society in the country and aimed to eliminate the intellectuals, city residents, ethnic Vietnamese, civil servants, and the religious leaders. Pol Pot's regime was regarded as one of the most barbaric and murderous in the world. The Khmer Rouge seized control of Cambodia in 1975 as they had won the war against the US and South Vietnamese troops. Almost immediately after taking power, the Khmer Rouge evacuated millions of residents in Phnom Penh. Apart from this, they stripped away the possessions of civil servants, doctors, teachers, and other professionals in the country. This was all part of their re-education process. Everything, all the aspects of a person's life, were controlled by Pol Pot. There were strict rules regarding people's clothing and how they lived their lives. Children were separated from their families and forced to participate in the military. The concepts of religion, money, and private property were no longer in existence. And the country, it was renamed as Democratic Kampuchea. After Pol Pot was placed on house arrest and died in 1998, the Khmer Rouge influence in Cambodia had significantly decreased and eventually completely collapsed. It is no secret that the people of Cambodia had undergone through a lot of tragedies in the past few decades. And even up to this day, Pol Pot's regime still haunts the Cambodian people. Even Cambodia as a country is still affected by this because all the killings, all the crime had taken a big toll not just on the people, but on their culture and economy.
In terms of history, it's very rich. It's a very old civilization, one of the older civilizations in Southeast Asia. It is a kingdom. It remains to be a kingdom, but right now it's under a military regime. But the highlights perhaps would be after the ancient kingdoms came about. They were conquered and were subjugated by foreigners. They were practically a protectorate of France from the 1800s, 1863 to shortly after the Second World War. So they sort of got their independence in 1953. So very similar to the Philippines, they were subjugated and therefore under a colonial rule. So that is why when you jump from their history, political history, to their to socio-cultural activities, the influence of the French is very strong. Okay, in terms of the food they eat, even some names, and the local culture. But the organic culture of Cambodia remains, it being a very old civilization, and the people, of course, try to retain that.
In this documentary, we will talk about Cambodia according to the 3 pillars of the ASEAN, specifically the political, security, economic, and social-cultural sectors. From there, we will elaborate every prominent issue concerning the 3. Cambodia is led with a constitutional monarchy headed by Hun Sen as the current leader of Cambodia. He is from the major political party called CCP, or Cambodian People's Party.
After it declared its independence in 1953, okay, the turnover of governments, because it used to be a kingdom, so you have a king there, okay, and this was replaced by well, the fight within the family, and at the same time the fight between the monarchy and the generals. So right now Hun Sen is the president, the prime minister rather, and it was a military takeover from some years back.
He is currently the world's longest serving prime minister and the longest serving head of the government of Cambodia, serving as the country's prime minister since 1985. The major opposing party of the CCP is the CNRP, or the Cambodian National Rescue Party, led by Kem Sokha, along with the inspiration of former President Sam Rainsy.
Despite the existence of another political party to challenge Hun Sen's regime, they are quickly shut down and banned as Hun Sen is determined to stay in power and continue his dictatorship.
One of the main issues of Cambodia revolve around the dictatorship of Prime Minister Hun Sen.
Well, he's got the army. So the trick for any dictator is to have a strong army that is either loyal or afraid of him. So that is the price. Okay, so you need to be in cahoots with the military, because the advantage of the military is that they have the guns. We civilians do not have guns, or if we own guns, these are the small guns for personal protection, while the military would have all the types of armaments they're supposed to defend the territory, the national territory, and they do. But if their loyalty lies in one, whether it's a monarch, a president, or a prime minister, then that particular individual, if he so desires to stay in power beyond what is allowed by law, he can even change the law. If you recall, Marcos did that. Okay, so you can change the constitution so that your 4-year term, your 6-year term can be extended indefinitely. Elections are not necessarily symbols of democracy if they are rigged, or if there are no qualified candidates. Naturally, the one that is well known, even if he's hated by half of the population, will win the election. So, is that a real election now? Is that a democracy? So, in the case of Cambodia, the same is true. They would have those elements in their, because their constitution mandates that they do this and that, so it is exercised. But on whether these are real elections or not is another story altogether. Okay, so why is he able to do that? There are many qualified potential candidates, but they are either afraid or disenfranchised, or are already in jail.
Most, if not all, the political problems in Cambodia root from the way Hun Sen rules the country. This is because most of the civilians and non-government affiliated activities are closely regulated and monitored. When these activities are in opposition to the interests and beliefs of the government, the civilians and or non-government people are doomed with imprisonment.
ខ្ញុំមិនគិតថាការបង្ខំរបស់ខ្ញុំហ្នឹងវាអាចជាប់ពន្ធនាគារបានទេគាត់បានប្រើរយៈពេលមួយព្រឹកដើម្បីកាត់ទោសមកលើរូបខ្ញុំហើយផុសតាងនោះគឺពុំមានអ្វីក្រៅពីសារដែលខ្ញុំសរសេរបង្ហោះនៅលើ Facebook របស់ខ្ញុំទេ
Kung Rai's family have asked him to stop being so outspoken. He recently got married and his wife is pregnant, but he is refusing to let up his criticism of the Hun Sen regime. In early September last year, the leader of Cambodia's main opposition party was arrested at his home in a late-night commando-style raid. Kem Sokha's wife says they were asleep when their house was surrounded.
គ្នាវាច្រើនណាស់ប្រហែលជាង100នាក់សិតដល់កំភ្លើងជ្រុងច្រាងធ្វើដូចវានឹងមកសមរភូមិអញ្ចឹងមកចាប់ប្តីយើងដាក់ខ្នោះទៅក្រោយទៅហ៊ានចងជ្រាំងតែដើរគាត់ទៅអញ្ចឹង
Kem Sokha's arrest came 4 years after he gave this speech at a temple in Melbourne, where he said he was receiving advice from American experts. Hun Sen went on TV saying this was evidence he was a foreign spy, working with America to overthrow the Cambodian government.
ការចោទប្រកាន់ហ្នឹងគឺអយុត្តិធម៌ជាទីបំផុតគឺជាការចោទប្រកាន់មួយដែលគ្មានមូលដ្ឋានច្បាស់លាស់ចេះតែចោទដើម្បីចាប់គាត់តែប៉ុណ្្នឹងព្រោះលោកហ៊ុនសែនហ្នឹងគាត់ខ្លាចចាញ់ឆ្នោត
Kem Sokha has spent the last 11 months locked up in a maximum security prison on the Vietnamese border, and his party has been banned. After the opposition was crushed, independent media was next. 2 reporters from Radio Free Asia were arrested and jailed, accused of espionage. They remain in prison alongside Australian filmmaker James Ricketson.
I'm hoping that I'll find out today which country I'm spying for. I haven't been informed which country I'm spying for yet.
Mr. Ricketson has now spent more than a year in jail after he was arrested for flying a drone over an opposition rally and charged with being a spy.
When non-government people or civilians say or do something that does not please the government, they risk being harmed as Hun Sen imposes his dictatorship and power through coercion and violence.
For sustained fear, such that you are able to stay in power for such a long period, it has to be much more subtle than that. So acid attacks are grave abuses, but sometimes it's a lot more fearful if you know that you can just disappear. Okay, an acid attack will make you ugly. Okay, if you don't die. But if there is that fear in yourself that you can sleep at night because someone might just knock on your door and take you away forever. So I'm just thinking of martial law because I'm already a kid when martial law was there. So that was the fear of people. See, no acid attack. There was no acid attack in the Philippines, but Marcos was able to stay for such a long period of time. There were bombings in every day there near Divisoria. So, but no one actually was dying because these were staged. but you become very afraid because that might happen to you. See, for me, that is, I'd be a lot more fearful than with that than an acid attack. Okay, so, but of course, every once in a while, you do the acid attacks just to make sure that this is not just the individual approach of instilling fear in people. This is the more larger type of, that's why you can't mobilize. If you mobilize, you suddenly get grenade, and they throw grenades at you, so you won't do it again. So did that happen anywhere? Well, my examples are always in the Philippines. It happened in Plaza Miranda. They threw a grenade. So do you think politicians or those who are anti-government would want to do another protest next week or next month if someone is throwing grenades at them? So you'd think twice, right? So that's how you instill fear. You don't do it every day. Sometimes it's psychological warfare. You instill, it's all fear. It's not yet happening, it might just happen. So if I just tell you, if you don't do this, I'll fail you. So you'd probably study, right? So you're already afraid. I tell that to you on the first day of class, and you'd probably be studying in my class compared to another professor who won't tell you that. So that's how you instill fear, and they're very good at that.
During 3 decades of rule, Hun Sen has cemented his grip on power using a combination of intimidation, fear, and violence. The country has descended into dictatorship.
They're calling on authorities to free 5 human rights campaigners who are now in prison. Black Monday has been going on for 3 weeks now, and authorities warn that if the unauthorized demonstrations continue, protesters will go to jail. Last week, police violently threw protesters into the back of a truck and sent them into detention.
Hun Sen has been ruling Cambodia for about 40 years now. McLeod states that the absence of opponents and variety in ruling the country risks political decay for Cambodia.
Cambodia's economy has grown and improved significantly over the years, along with poverty's significant decrease. Nonetheless, the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index of 2013 ranked Cambodia as 133 out of 185 among the hardest countries to successfully operate in. This then makes Cambodia as one of the lowest ranked countries among the Southeast Asian countries. In fact, in 2019, the rank even got lower from 133 to 138.
Ease of doing business is not, you start with infrastructure. Okay, Cambodia is not yet ready for big businesses. Okay, the multinationals will need to be the one to lay it out for Cambodia. For example, if you want to do business in Cambodia, you build your own roads to connect to the main roads. So if you're an investor, you wouldn't want to do that. Okay, the reason why you go to a country that offers cheap labor is that you assume that the infrastructure to set up your business is there already. Utilities should be available, internet should be available, all the things that are required to run a good business. So if you do not have that, and that's just infrastructure, and it's very basic, if it's lacking or it's not there, you won't be able to attract too many.
According to IMD Deputy Manager Director Mitsuhiro Furusawa, the government plays a vital role in the ease of doing business in the country. They have implemented inefficient government procedures, high taxes, and complicated administrative work. This also has a lot to do with Cambodia's underdeveloped financial system.
A lot of multinationals now are, of course, very conscious about, for example, child labor, about freedom and all these things, because most of these countries are from democratic countries. And they expect something similar when they go to your country. Okay? They like the Philippines because it's relatively free here. Or what is not likable about the Philippines is that it's too free, we rally a lot. So, and that's, we have Kilosang Mayo Uno and all this. It's part of our constitution, but it is not very favorable for example, for big type of manufacturing. If people keep on asking for higher wages every May 1, things like that. No? So they go to Vietnam. Vietnam is a lot more structured. They don't have rallies. Labor is cheap. Infrastructure is available, and that is the reason why Vietnam has almost overtaken the Philippines. In terms of GDP per capita, we are practically equal. Thailand was way ahead. We used to be much, well, we were way farther, well, we're over Thailand at one point, but we were overtaken by Thailand after the 90s. After the financial crisis, they overtook us already. So, in the case of Cambodia, the infrastructure is not there, the political climate is not yet very receiving for foreign investments, for multinationals. A lot of people will not like multinationals because it's imperialistic and all that. But practically all governments, whether democracies or non-democracies, would always welcome multinationals because these are hard investments that are infused in your economy. On its own, Cambodia would be very weak and would be very slow in pushing its economy upwards. So it will require those multinationals to invest in Cambodia.
There are several vulnerabilities in banking that risk the country's macroeconomic stability, and these are caused by high credit growth and too much reliance on foreign borrowing. In fact, the World Bank states that the average loan size in Cambodia is among the highest in the world.
Once one of the poorest countries in the world, Cambodia is now awash with money. Here in Sihanoukville, thousands of wealthy Chinese stream into town and spend big in the casinos. It's being pitched as the next Macau, while locals are banned from gambling.
Decades rebuilt and transformed. On the back of foreign investment and strong exports, this year Cambodia is forecast to have the 6th fastest growing economy in the world, a ranking it's had for 20 years. The wealthy have become very wealthy, although exactly how much money they have is in many cases impossible to know, given that Cambodia is also regarded by some as one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
As a result, a lot of the companies and businesses in Cambodia compromise with micro, small, and medium enterprises or MSMEs. Unfortunately, they cannot maximize their growth given the instance. As a result of decades of conflict with Vietnam coinciding with their civil war, the overall success and development of Cambodia's infrastructure falls behind its neighboring countries. Cambodia still struggles with high energy costs and insufficient supply of electricity. Only 62% of villages and 53% of households have ready access to electricity. Apart from this, Cambodia also struggles with transportation and traffic congestion. The country has limited train system that lacks railways connecting the urban areas to rural ones. Additionally, the country has approximately 35,769 kilometers of highways, but only 11.6% are paved. Because of what has been said, poverty still exists in Cambodia. Healthcare and education is still very much impaired by the poverty present in the country, with both being very limited for the citizens, especially the youth. With this, viral diseases are easily spread throughout cities, leaving people more susceptible to asking for healthcare that is already limited from the beginning.
poverty is defined differently. In the Philippines, we have a poverty line. If you are earning so much, then you are within the threshold, below the threshold, above the threshold. ADB would have its own metrics, World Bank would have its own metrics, but instantly, if you look at the numbers, if you look at GDP and GNP per capita, or even national, not the per capita, but the overall GNP or GDP of Cambodia, you will realize that the productivity is very low. It's for such a relatively, it's not a small country with a significant population. So if you compare it, for example, with its neighbor Laos, Laos has only 7 million people, but the productivity, the GDP of Laos is around $20 million. Okay, so that says a lot for a country with around more than 16.5 million population. They only have a GDP of $27 million. So that's not good at all. Okay, so it means that they are not generating enough. So if the country is not generating enough, the trickle down effect to the people. GDP is a magic number for the entire country. Okay, for example, the Philippines, the GDP of the Philippines is $356.7 million on a population of 108. You divide those numbers and you get the per capita GDP. No? But when you say Filipinos have a per capita GDP of $9,493, you're students, you're not earning yet. Okay, but you have that count already. You have like $10,000 per capita. So where's that per capita? Okay, so it lies on the bank accounts of the very rich. Okay, that's why in the Philippines, despite the very high GDP and GNP, poverty is still very high. Okay, so but guys like the names of the buildings in Lasal, Henry C, Gokongwei, Rason, sino pa, Velasco, patay na si Velasco. But all these super rich people are some of the richest people in the world, not just the region, not just Asia, but the world. And then you'd have very poor people in the countryside. Okay. Now you go to a country like Cambodia. It's a relatively not a small country. It has a good size of population, but then they're earning so little. And then if you have ultra rich people in Cambodia, imagine if the ultra rich are getting this much billion in the Philippines. So the ultra rich in Cambodia would practically have the lion's share of that small GDP. So how much will remain to the poor? Okay, so the distribution of wealth or the fruit of that productivity is always skewed towards the rich. Okay, so even if the proportion of the rich and poor people in the Philippines would be equal to the proportion of rich and poor people.
When it comes to socio-cultural issues of Cambodia, we would primarily focus on the key issues affecting the youth of the country, as well as the emerging environmental problems of Cambodia. Starting with the key issues among the youth on health, education, employment, and participation. Major health concerns in Cambodia are sexual and reproductive health issues, unwanted pregnancies, unsafe abortion, mental health problems, alcohol and tobacco usage, and accidents and violence. In terms of educational concerns with Cambodia's youth, they also have trouble with education, in which the secondary net enrollment rate for 2014 is only 27.7%. The dropout rate also increases during secondary education, with a rate of 21% in 2014. Both access and quality of education pose crucial issues and indicate a need for more relevant school curricula, sufficiently trained teachers, and more resources for school improvements. In the country, 15 to 29-year-old comprise around 43% of the working age population, and the labor force is still characterized by low education and skills. Decent work is difficult to find for young people due to the dominance of the informal sector in the labor market. Most of them work for agriculture. Youth also find it hard to integrate into the labor market due to limited education and training, the lack of job search abilities, and of proper links between education and the labor market. Due to the mismatch between education, outcomes, and labor needs, and the inability of the economy to absorb the growing labor force, Cambodia is likely to suffer from high youth unemployment in the near future. On a positive note, youth are becoming more informed and engaged in civic and political activities, especially through the rapid penetration of social media. In 2015, about 40% of Cambodians had access to the internet and or Facebook. Cambodia's youth participates actively in community-oriented activities. However, the lack of trust in communities, political agendas, and the justice system is still a problem for their participation in development activities. Furthermore, due to the legacy of war, youth are cautious about participating in political activities. Finally, in terms of their environmental issues, according to MOL, the environmental crisis that Cambodia is currently experiencing stems from two categories: management and mismanagement of natural resources, and pollution and sanitation in urbanized areas.
Well, they have a lot of problems. I don't think they, well, pollution is starting to become a problem in their cities, okay? Because of the influx of tourists, the relatively, there is planning, but there is weak urban planning, okay? Because they are rushing into it, okay? They tend to copy their neighbors. If they have tall buildings, okay, let's set up tall buildings. The first time I went there wasn't even an elevator in any of the hotels, okay? And this was the 90s already, okay? So the type of development that they're experiencing right now, infrastructurally especially, is unmitigated. It's just very fast, okay? I'm not even sure if they have a planning bureau in Cambodia. So you need to plan it well so that the type of infrastructure that are laid out now will not be in conflict with the environment, will not be in conflict with culture and arts and history, because you need to retain that. No? So you don't just build and destroy the old things. There's an old, we need to set up a new casino, a new supermarket, a new mall, so let's destroy this temple, old temple, it's old anyway. Because that is part of your past, part of your culture, part of your history. If you retain that, it will have value for the people, even for tourism in the future. Okay, so they need to plan well their infrastructure, because right now, if you go to Cambodia, it's getting to be a bit, it's funny, it's a bit polluted in the city centers, but when you go to the outskirts, to the rural areas, of course, it's all fresh air, because there's nothing much happening yet in the rural areas. Okay, so it's still pristine, it's there. So the environment is preserved in the rural areas where development is necessary, because development is not necessarily bad. No? So it doesn't automatically mean that you will pollute the area if you set up a new power plant, if you set up new roads or an airport. You are simply developing the area to accommodate new business, tourism, and all that. Okay, but you need to plan it well so that it does not destroy the environment. The way that is happening now in most urban centers in Cambodia is that you have this unmitigated type of development that is happening, and it can definitely result to bad environmental concerns in the near future. Just like what happened in Metro Manila, Metro Bangkok, Metro Jakarta.
In seeing all the current political, economic, and socio-cultural problems the country of Cambodia still struggles with, one important question remains. Is anything being done to resolve all these? We can surely hope so. Cambodia's perhaps there are no specific plans of action being made as of the moment, but having close relationships with these countries are already a big help to Cambodia as they get to create bilateral agreements with them.
Well, they have a voice in ASEAN. There are 10 countries and they're one of the voices there. They vote on, well, they are a bona fide voter in ASEAN, so they can overrule whomever, okay? Them being very poor is not the big issue really if you have like the same voice as the very wealthy like Singapore. Of course, on the side, in bilateral arrangements, when they deal one-to-one with the other countries, that's where the larger benefits happen. ASEAN becomes the place for them to deal with the Filipinos, with the Thais, with the Indonesian, with everyone in the region. And we are all co-equal in ASEAN. Right now, I'd like to think that they're benefiting a lot from ASEAN, because this became the avenue for them to discuss trading, for them to learn something in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure, to attract investments, because you have ASEAN plus 2, ASEAN plus 3, all these other countries, wealthy countries that are attached to ASEAN, they are also able to access this now. If you're not a member of ASEAN, you will have a hard time dealing with these countries simply because you're not part of the clique, you're not part of the group, you do not have a membership. So you will be at the tail end. If someone is considering, I need to, some wealthy country, the businesses in one wealthy country would want to invest in ASEAN. And if you're not a member of ASEAN, then you will not benefit from that, because ASEAN will not push, or will not even write your name as a potential place for investment. Now that they are part of ASEAN, then they are part of that list. Okay? They are able to see how member countries in ASEAN, which like them were relatively backward some years back, and how they progressed and able to adapt in a very globalized environment. No? How they benefited from globalization. We're assuming here that ASEAN is pro-globalization, which it is. Okay? Of course, there are always drawbacks. Okay? In ASEAN, you try to, for example, set up certain rules. Okay, we will cut the taxes for example, for rice in 2020. No more taxation. It's just an example. So if you are a rice seller, you will benefit or not benefit from such a type of arrangement. Okay, if you are like Thailand with very nice commercialized operation in rice production, you will benefit from that. If you're like the Philippines, where even if rice just grows anywhere, but there is no state subsidy in producing it, or it's not at a very high commercial operation, you will lose from the transactions. Okay, so depending on where you are, on how well your agricultural setup is in your country, you will benefit from certain policies that ASEAN is making. So they have a voice there, but they vote, of course. If they are outvoted, then it will be favorable for some and less favorable for others. In the case of Cambodia, since it's at the tail end of everything that is economically advanced in Southeast Asia, I think it will benefit a lot from ASEAN. It doesn't have to reinvent the wheel in coming up with technologies that will help them. They can just copy from Thailand, from Vietnam, from the Philippines. They just need to check that what they're copying is appropriate for them, and that will help them take off. They can seek assistance from the member countries of ASEAN, because that's that's the part of ASEAN that makes it meaningful for the members. the economic integration of the countries. So even if it's at the tail end right now, one of the reasons why its economy is propelling quite fast in recent years, I would say it's because of ASEAN and the member countries of the ASEAN and the additional member countries of ASEAN.
The ASEAN becomes an avenue for them to build relationships and help one another when it comes to the way they approach their problems, like with infrastructure, business, poverty, the environment, and much more.